Have you ever stood in the ruins of your own life? I don't mean a metaphorical bad day. I mean the real, tangible, dust and ashes kind of ruin, where the smoke is still clearing and you can't tell the difference between what was real and what was just a dream you were having. My story isn't about the fire that brought my world down. It's about what you find in the wreckage when you have no choice but to start digging. It's about discovering that the most valuable thing you own is the one thing no one can ever take from you. And it's about the moment you realize that the person who tried to bury you didn't know you were a seed. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about the end of a marriage. It's about the beginning of a woman. My name is Sarah, and for 15 years, my identity was we. It was the first word in every sentence. We are going to dinner. We love that little Italian place on the corner. We are saving for a trip to Spain. We think we'll have kids in a year or two. The word I had become a foreign language, a rusty, forgotten thing I no longer knew how to speak. Our life was a house of cards, built with such painstaking precision that I had mistaken it for a fortress of stone. Each card was a memory, a shared joke, an anniversary dinner. The King of Hearts was the day he proposed in Central Park, the autumn leaves falling around us like confetti. The Queen of Diamonds was the day we signed the papers for our first home, our hands shaking with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. We stacked them one by one, creating a beautiful, intricate structure that, from the outside, looked impenetrable. I was so proud of it. I polished every surface, straightened every corner. I believed it would stand forever. But a house of cards, no matter how perfect it looks, collapses with a single breath. Mine came down in the silence of a Tuesday night. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation like you see in the movies. The truth didn't arrive like a thunderstorm, splitting the sky with lightning and rage. It seeped in like a poisonous whisper, a slow, colorless gas that you don't notice until you're already suffocating. It was in a quiet admission, a phrase dropped so casually into conversation that it took my brain a full minute to process the blast radius. And in that moment, every pillar of my existence dissolved. It wasn't just the affair. That was a symptom, a brutal, ugly one, but it wasn't the disease. The disease was the crushing realization that the life I was living was a meticulously staged play. The cozy dinners, the weekend trips, the whispered, I love yous before we fell asleep. It was all a performance. The man who shared my bed and my secrets was a stranger. And I, the co-star, the leading lady, was just a supporting character in a script he alone had written. I didn't even know I was acting. The pain of that discovery was visceral. It felt like a compound fracture of the soul, a break so deep and jagged that I could feel the sharp edges grinding against my ribs with every breath I took. I spent days in a fog, walking through the rooms of our house, his house I would soon learn, touching the furniture, the picture frames, the books on the shelves, trying to find a single thing that still felt real. Nothing did. It was all a set, and the play was over. But it was in the divorce settlement that the humiliation became my shadow. The legal process is a cold, sterile thing. It takes a life, a living, breathing entity full of warmth and laughter and tears, and it reduces it to a spreadsheet, assets and liabilities, debits and credits. He was methodical. He took the house we'd made a home, the one where we'd painted the nursery a soft, hopeful yellow, even though it was still empty. He took every piece of furniture we'd spent weekends choosing together, arguing playfully over fabric swatches and wood finishes. He took the car we'd taken on road trips up the coast, singing off-key to the radio with the windows down. And with a cold smile and the colder ink of the law, he tried to take my dignity. In that sterile conference room, with lawyers speaking a language of clauses and stipulations, I was reduced to a line item, a problem to be managed, an expense to be minimized. He left me at ground zero, with one suitcase filled with clothes that smelled of a life I no longer had, and the suffocating weight of a future I had no idea how to start. I remember his final words to me as he walked away from the lawyer's office. Good luck, Sarah, you're going to need it. It wasn't a wish, it was a curse. What he didn't know, what Press Weiss didn't know, is that ground zero isn't the end. It's the most powerful starting line in the world. Because when you have nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain. My new life began on the cold, hardwood floor of a tiny, empty apartment. The kind with thin walls where you can hear your neighbor's television and smell what they're cooking for dinner. For weeks, that floor was my world. I sat on it, I ate on it, and some nights, I cried on it until the sun came up, my tears making dark little patterns on the wood. The loneliness was a physical weight, a lead blanket so heavy I could barely breathe. The silence was deafening, a roaring vacuum where the familiar sounds of a life, his footsteps, his laugh, the sound of his keys in the door, used to be. I clutched the ghost of what I'd lost, replaying every memory, every lie, trying to pinpoint the exact moment my fortress turned back into paper. I mourned. I mourned the man I thought I married. I mourned the future I had planned with meticulous, loving detail, but mostly I mourned the woman I had been, the trusting, hopeful, naive woman who believed in forever. She was gone. She died on that Tuesday night. Then, one morning, something shifted. The sun streamed through the cheap blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had cried all my tears. My body felt empty, scoured clean, and for the first time, the thought that entered my head wasn't about him. It wasn't about what I'd lost. It was a simple, quiet question. What now? I didn't have an answer, but instead of pulling the covers over my head, I got up. I went to the hardware store down the street, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, feeling like a ghost among the living. I stared at the wall of paint swatches, a kaleidoscope of possibilities. I didn't pick a sensible beige or a calming blue. I picked a yellow. A bright, defiant, unapologetic yellow. The color of sunflowers and summer and pure, unadulterated nerve. I spent the entire day painting one wall of that tiny, sad apartment. I didn't have a ladder, so I stood on a wobbly kitchen chair. I didn't have a drop cloth, so I splattered paint on the floor and on my clothes and in my hair. With every stroke of the roller, I felt like I was reclaiming something. I was taking a blank, empty space, and I was making it mine. I was injecting life and color into the gray emptiness. When I was finished, I stood back, covered in sweat and yellow paint, and I looked at that wall. It was absurdly, gloriously bright. It was a shout in a quiet room, and for the first time in months, I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. That yellow wall didn't fix my life. It didn't bring back my house or my money, or my sense of security. But it was a start. It was the first brick. It was proof that I could create something out of nothing. This is the story of that journey, my journey from the cold hardwood floor back to myself. It's about learning to speak the language of I again. I want, I need, I will. It's about the first time I took a road trip alone, with no destination in mind, and heard the sound of my own laughter, not as an echo of someone else's, but as its own, pure music. It's about the grueling, terrifying, and exhilarating process of rebuilding not just a life, but an identity, piece by piece, mistake by mistake, victory by victory. We're going to explore the art of turning shattered pieces into a mosaic. The rediscovery of passions I had buried under the weight of painting, hiking, writing poetry in the middle of the night. The courage it took to walk away from the career path I'd chosen to support his dreams and launch a new one from scratch, fueled only by my own ambition. We're going to talk about the forging of friendships that saw me for who I was, not who I belonged to. Friendships that became the steel beams in my new construction. This is a story about learning to forgive. And no, I don't mean forgiving him, that's his journey. This is about the much harder, much more important work of forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for not seeing the signs, for believing in a story that was fiction, for giving away pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left. By the end of our time together, you won't see the woman who survived a divorce, you will meet the woman who was born from it. A woman who now understands that true ownership isn't a deed to a house or a title to a car. True ownership is the unbreakable strength you discover when you have nothing left to lose. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can face the absolute worst and walk out the other side. He took the bricks, but he left the architect. And the woman I am today didn't just build a house, she built a fortress. But this one is different. It's not made of cards. It's made of resilience and self-awareness and that defiant, glorious yellow. And from in here, the view is of a future I designed myself. This is the story of how, by leaving me with nothing, he unknowingly gave me everything. Every demolition begins with a blueprint. a plan for what once was, or what was supposed to be. Before the dust and the wreckage, there was a design, a dream drawn on paper. My story, the one that ends in ruins, began in a place dedicated to dreams drawn on paper, a little bookstore on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The kind of rain that makes you want to find a corner and disappear into a different world. The store smelled of old pages and brewing coffee, a scent I've always associated with safety. I was running my fingers along the spines in the architecture section, tracing the names of people who built things that lasted for centuries. And that's when I saw him. He was standing a few feet away, holding the very book I'd come to find. He wasn't movie star handsome, not in a way that steals the air from a room. It was quieter than that. He had this look of intense focus, but his eyes were kind. When he looked up and saw me looking at the book, he didn't just glance away. He smiled, and it wasn't a polite stranger on the street smile. It was a real one, the kind that crinkles the corners of the eyes, like we were sharing a private joke. "Looks like we have the same taste," he said. His voice was calm and steady, like the rest of him. That was it. That's how it started, not with a lightning bolt, but with a quiet spark of recognition. My first impression of him was one of solidity. He seemed built to last. He talked about his own dreams of becoming an architect, of creating spaces where people could build lives. He spoke with a passion that was magnetic, but it was tempered with a steadiness, a confidence that made you believe every word he said. He was ambitious, but he made it sound like a noble calling, not a selfish pursuit. He was the man who had the blueprint. I was drawn to the certainty in him, because I was a woman full of questions. He felt like an answer. In those early days, he was everything a person could hope for. He was attentive. He didn't just listen. He heard. He'd remember a throwaway comment I'd made weeks earlier about a favorite song and have it playing in the car the next time he picked me up. He learned that I hated olives and loved the smell of rain on hot asphalt. He made me feel like I was the most fascinating book he'd ever opened, and he was determined to read every single page. He was building a case, and I was the jury, and the verdict was a foregone conclusion. I was already his. There's one night from that time that I've played over in my head 1,000 times. It was maybe our 4th or 5th date. We'd planned to go to a fancy new restaurant, but a sudden thunderstorm, the kind that floods the streets in minutes, washed out our reservation. We were stuck, laughing, under the tiny awning of a closed butcher shop. Instead of calling it a night, he grabbed my hand, and we ran through the downpour to a Greasy Spoon diner that was still open. We sat in a red vinyl booth drinking watery coffee, our clothes dripping onto the checkered floor, and we just talked. For hours. We talked about everything and nothing. Our childhoods, our biggest fears, our most ridiculous dreams. The rest of the world just melted away. There was no pretense, no performance. It just felt real. At one point, he grabbed a paper napkin from the dispenser and pulled a pen from his jacket pocket. "Okay?" he said, his eyes alight with that focused passion I'd first seen in the bookstore. "If we could build a house anywhere in the world, what would it look like?" And right there, on that flimsy little square of paper, he started to draw. He sketched a front porch with a swing, 'cause I'd mentioned I loved them. He drew big, wide windows to let in the morning light, because I'd told him I was solar-powered. He added a little garden in the back for the tomatoes I wanted to grow, and a studio for my painting. He listened to all my little daydreams and gave them a foundation, walls, and a roof. When he was done, he pushed the napkin across the table. It wasn't a masterpiece of architectural design. It was a scribble of lines and hope. But looking at it, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling so profound it almost scared me. It was the blueprint for us. It was the promise of a future, tangible and real, sketched out in blue ink on a disposable piece of paper. I folded that napkin carefully and put it in my wallet. For 15 years I carried it with me. It was my touchstone. It was the proof. It was the foundation of the beautiful, intricate fortress I believed we were building together. It was the first card, placed with such care, in our house of cards. I just didn't know it at the time. All I knew was that I had met the architect of my future, and I had never felt so safe in my entire life. That napkin drawing wasn't just a doodle in a diner. It became the first page in the official blueprint of our life. Our courtship felt less like a romance and more like a collaboration on the most important project of our lives. Every date was a site survey, every conversation a discussion of materials. We were two architects designing a shared future, and I was all in. The transition from I to we was seamless, a current so gentle and sure that I didn't even notice I was being carried out to sea. The proposal came a year later, on a crisp autumn afternoon. It wasn't in Central Park with falling leaves, or on some grand public stage. It was quintessentially him, thoughtful, deliberate, and tied to the very foundation of our story. He took me to an open field on the edge of the city, a place where old farmland was just beginning to be surveyed for new homes. The air smelled of turned earth and possibility. We walked for a while, our footsteps quiet on the grass. He didn't say much, just held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Then he stopped at the highest point of the field, a small crest overlooking the distant skyline. He turned to me, his eyes holding that same steady, serious light they'd had in the bookstore. He didn't get down on one knee. He just looked at me and said, "This is it, Sarah. This is the ground floor. Everything we've talked about, everything we've dreamed of, it starts here. It starts now." He reached into his pocket, but instead of a ring box, he pulled out a small, worn, wooden compass. "I can't promise I'll always know the way," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard before. "But I promise I will spend the rest of my life building a home with you, and that you will always be my true north." Then he opened his other hand, and there was the ring. Simple, elegant, a single stone that seemed to hold all the light of that afternoon sun. My yes was a breath, a whisper, but it felt like the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a cornerstone being laid. We weren't just getting married, we were breaking ground. Our first years as a married couple were a blur of joyful construction. We were young and full of a relentless, beautiful energy. His career began to take off, his name attached to sleek, innovative new buildings that were changing the city skyline. I was his biggest cheerleader, his sounding board, his partner. I managed our life with the precision of a project manager, creating a seamless, supportive home base so he could focus on building his empire. Our shared dream was his dream. I adopted it so completely, I forgot I ever had any of my own. We bought our first house, not the one on the napkin, not yet, but a starter home, a fixer-upper that we poured all our weekends and spare cash into. We learned how to spackle and sand, how to tile a backsplash and hang drywall. Our life was a constant project. We were always building something. There were paint smudges on our clothes and sawdust in our hair. Our hands were calloused, but our hearts were full. We were laying the floorboards of our daily routines, framing the walls of our future. We talked about the kids who would one day run down these hallways, the trips we would take, the life we would fill these rooms with. Every decision was a we decision. Every accomplishment was a we accomplishment. I saw myself as the scaffolding that allowed his grand designs to reach the sky. It was a vital role, an important one. Or so I told myself. I didn't realize that scaffolding, by its very nature, is temporary. It's meant to be taken down once the real structure is complete. There were so many moments of happiness in those years, tiny perfect bricks laid in the mortar of our marriage. But there's one night that stands out. It wasn't an anniversary or a grand celebration. It was ordinary, and that's what made it so perfect. It was the night we finished renovating the main floor of that first house. It had been months of work. We were exhausted, broke, and living in a constant state of controlled chaos. That evening, we had finally moved the last of the tools out of the living room. We ordered a cheap pizza because the new stove wasn't hooked up yet, and we sat on the freshly polished hardwood floor, leaning against a wall that we had painted together. We didn't even have a couch. The room was empty, cavernous. A single lamp in the corner cast long shadows. There was no art on the walls, no rugs on the floor. It was just a space. But it was our space. He had brought in a small portable radio, and an old, crackly love song came on. Without a word, he stood up and pulled me to my feet. And we danced. Right there, in the middle of our empty living room, with the smell of fresh paint and cardboard pizza boxes in the air. I rested my head on his chest, and I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart. The whole world, with all its noise and its demands, just fell away. There was nothing but the music, the warmth of his arms around me, and the quiet hum of a future that felt absolutely, unshakably certain. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, "See? I told you we could build anything." In that moment, I felt a sense of profound and utter security. This was it. This was the fortress. The walls around me weren't made of drywall and plaster. They were made of love, of shared work, of unwavering commitment. The foundation wasn't concrete. It was him. It was us. I looked around that empty room, and I didn't see what was missing. I saw everything we were going to fill it with. I saw a lifetime. It was the most beautiful, complete, and perfect structure I had ever seen. And I truly believed, with every cell in my body, that it would stand forever. A fortress doesn't fall in a day. The erosion starts slowly, in ways you don't even notice. It's not the thunder of a cannonball. It's the quiet work of water finding a crack in the stone. For us, the water was his success. The more skyscrapers he built that touched the clouds, the smaller our own home seemed to become in his eyes. The project of us was finished, a starter home he had outgrown, and he was already looking at new, more exciting ground to break. The first signs weren't dramatic. They were changes in atmosphere, shifts in pressure that you feel in your bones before the storm hits. He stopped talking about the future in terms of our dreams and started talking about my legacy. The late nights we used to spend painting walls together were replaced by late nights he spent at, quote, client dinners. He'd come home smelling of expensive whiskey and a world I wasn't a part of, and the sawdust on his clothes was replaced by the invisible dust of ambition. The collaborative energy was gone. He was the architect, and I was becoming part of the landscape, something to be looked at from the windows of his high-rise office. I tried to talk to him about it, to bring us back to that red vinyl booth in the diner, back to the napkin blueprint. But he'd look at me with a kind of weary patience, as if I were a sentimental child clinging to an old, outdated drawing. "Sarah, we're not kids anymore," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm. "Things change. We have to grow." But it didn't feel like we were growing together. It felt like he was growing, and I was being pruned back, my own branches trimmed away, so I wouldn't block his sun. The real cracks began to show not in arguments, but in moments of quiet cruelty, disguised as sophistication. We were hosting a dinner party for some of his new, important colleagues and their impossibly chic wives. I had spent days planning everything, wanting to create the perfect evening, to show him I could still be a partner in this new, glossy life he was building. During a lull in the conversation, one of the wives asked me what I did. Before I could answer, he jumped in with a warm, charming smile. "Sarah is my rock," he said, putting his arm around me. Everyone murmured in appreciation. But then he added, "And she has her passions. She paints. Little watercolors. They're very charming." He said it with such affection, but the words landed like stones. Really cool, charming. In that single phrase, he reduced something that was a core part of me, my art, my voice, into a quaint, harmless hobby. He made me sound like a child finger painting at the kitchen table. I saw the polite, dismissive smiles on the other women's faces. The subject changed, and I just sat there, feeling my face burn with a shame I couldn't name. I felt like a piece of outdated furniture in his sleek, modern new life, an heirloom he was too polite to put in storage, but was secretly embarrassed by. Later that night, after everyone had left, I tried to tell him how it made me feel. The house was quiet, filled with the ghosts of forced laughter and the smell of leftover wine. "Why would you say that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You made it sound so insignificant." He didn't get angry, he got logical. He took on the tone of a patient teacher explaining a complex problem to a slow student. "Honey, I was building you up. These are serious people." It was a compliment. "I'm just trying to manage perceptions, to help you fit in." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're just so sensitive sometimes. You have to understand the world I live in now. It's different. I'm protecting you." And there it was, the justification. He wasn't belittling me. He was protecting me. He wasn't controlling the narrative. He was managing it. He was the architect, and he was just redesigning my personality to better fit his new structure. I went to bed that night feeling confused and utterly alone. Was I being too sensitive? Was he right? The gaslighting was so subtle, so expertly done, that I started to question my own footing. He was chipping away at my foundation, telling me the cracks were in my head, not in the walls he was building around me. That was the beginning of the real fear. The fear that I was losing my mind, that the man I trusted with my entire world was now telling me my world wasn't real. And with that fear came suspicion. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a thought so ugly I would immediately push it away. But it kept coming back, stronger each time. It was in the way he started guarding his phone like it was a state secret, the way he'd go into another room to take a call, his voice dropping to a low murmur. It was the credit card bill with charges for dinners for two at restaurants I'd never been to, which he explained away as client meetings. Each excuse was plausible. Each lie was perfectly constructed, a load-bearing wall designed to hold up the facade. But the house was groaning under the weight of them. I felt it. I was living inside a structure that was about to collapse, and I was the only one who could hear the stress fractures forming in the dark. The discovery, when it came, wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was exactly what my story had become, quiet, cold, and happening in the margins of the life I thought I was living. It was a Tuesday night. He had come home late, exhausted from a site visit that ran over. He fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing deep and even beside me in the bed we had chosen together. For hours I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the room a roaring in my ears. The air was thick with things unsaid. Around 2 a.m. I slipped out of bed, a nameless dread pulling me. His jacket was slung over the chair in the corner. My hand was shaking as I reached into the pocket. I didn't even know what I was looking for. A receipt? A business card? My fingers closed around a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a receipt. It was a dry cleaning ticket. But clipped to it was a small, square card. A gift enclosure card from a florist. The kind you get with a bouquet of flowers. The handwriting on it wasn't mine. It was a flowing feminine script. It said, "For my architect. Can't wait for our blueprint to become a reality. All my love, eh? My architect." The words stole the air from my lungs. The nickname, the language, the theft of our story. It was a violation so profound it made me physically sick. I sank to the floor, clutching that tiny piece of cardstock, and the entire 15-year structure of my life came crashing down around me in absolute silence. Every memory, every shared joke, every dance in an empty room was instantly rewritten, corrupted. The foundation wasn't just cracked. It had been a lie from the very beginning. I walked back into the bedroom and stood over him while he slept. I looked at his face, the face I had loved for half my adult life, and I saw a stranger, a very, very good architect, who had designed and built a perfect, beautiful lie, and had made me its willing, unknowing resident. I didn't wake him up. What was the point? The wrecking ball had already done its work. I just sat on the floor, on the other side of the room, and waited for the sun to come up over the ruins. The play was over. The lights were coming up. And I was alone on a stage that was nothing but rubble. I waited for the sun. I don't know why, but it felt important to face the end of my world in the light of day. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, that little card from the florist, a cold, sharp-edged thing in my hand, until the gray dawn turned to a pale, watery yellow. He woke up slowly, stretching with the easy confidence of a man who believes he is the king of his own castle. He saw me sitting there, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Sarah, what are you doing on the floor? Are you okay?" The question was so absurd, so deeply disconnected from the reality that was suffocating me, that a laugh, brittle and dry, escaped my lips. I didn't get up. I just looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at my husband. I was studying the lines of a stranger, a brilliant actor who had just finished a 15-year run. I held up the card. "My architect," I read aloud, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Can't wait for our blueprint to become a reality. All my love, eh?" I watched his face. For a moment, there was a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. The mask slipped. I saw the stranger. Then the architect took over. He became calm. He put on his face of patient reason, the one he used when I was being too sensitive. "Sarah, let's not jump to conclusions," he began, his voice a low, soothing hum. "That's from a client. It's a joke. You know how they are. But the lie didn't work this time. The foundation was gone. His words just hung in the air, hollow and useless. I had the evidence in my hand. It was a fragment of a different life, a life he was building behind my back, using our language, our dreams. Stop, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his performance like a shard of glass. Just stop talking. He did. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was waiting for the tears, for the screaming, for the scene he knew how to manage. But I had nothing left to give him. The shock had cauterized the wound. I was just empty. He sat on the edge of the bed, a calculated look of concern on his face. We can get through this, he said softly. Whatever you think is happening, we're stronger than this. And that's when I knew. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He saw this not as a betrayal, but as a structural problem in his design, something to be patched over and painted, the cracks hidden from view. The word came out of me before I even realized I was going to say it. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. I want a divorce. There. It was said. The final load-bearing wall had been pulverized. His face changed. The concern vanished, replaced by something cold and appraising. The husband was gone. The architect was now a demolition expert, assessing the site. He nodded slowly, a single, sharp movement. All right, he said, his voice all business. If that's what you want. There was no sadness. No regret. Just acceptance. The project was over. It was time to clear the lot. The weeks that followed were a surreal, out-of-body experience. We lived in the same house, two ghosts haunting the memory of a life. The silence was a weapon. We communicated through clipped sentences and lawyers, emails. I started packing my things, and the process was a form of torture. Every object I touched screamed a memory at me. The chipped coffee mug from our first anniversary. The worn-out sweater I used to steal from his closet. The framed photo of us on that empty living room floor, dancing. I was packing up a museum of a life that had been a lie. He watched me, detached, as if I were a mover he'd hired. One afternoon, I stood in the doorway of the empty spare room, the one we had painted that hopeful, soft yellow. The room we'd called the nursery. My hand rested on the doorframe. He walked up behind me. I thought, for a fleeting second, he might show an ounce of remorse. You know, he said, his voice casual, I was never a fan of this color, too bright, and he walked away. That was it. That was the eulogy for our shared future. The divorce process itself was his final masterpiece of architecture. It was designed to dismantle me, piece by piece. It was not amicable. It was a strategic cold-blooded campaign. In a sterile conference room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and quiet desperation, our life was laid out on a table like a body for an autopsy. Our marriage was reduced to a series of spreadsheets. The house, the furniture, the car, our savings. He had a legal justification for everything. His name was on the deed. His salary had paid the mortgage. The assets were tied to his business. I had been a partner in life, but on paper, I was a dependent. An expense. He argued over every single item. I remember sitting there, numb, as my lawyer and his lawyer debated the value of the dining room table we bought at a flea market and refinished together, our hands covered in stain and varnish. To me, it was a memory of a happy Saturday. To him, it was an asset with a depreciated value of $200. The hardest day was the final one. The day we signed the papers. We sat on opposite sides of a long, polished mahogany table. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, the successful architect closing a deal. I felt like a ghost, transparent and weightless. The stack of papers in front of me felt like a tombstone. My lawyer slid the final signature page in front of me and pointed to a line at the bottom. Right here, Sarah. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. This was it, the legal end, the black and white confirmation that 15 years of my life were being officially dissolved. I looked up at him, one last time, searching for something. A flicker of the man who drew our future on a napkin, the man who danced with me in an empty room. He just looked back at me, his expression unreadable, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, go on, finish it. I signed my name. The ink was so black against the white paper, it felt like an ending and a branding all at once. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost buckled me in the chair, but beneath it, something else. A terrifying, whisper-thin sliver of relief. The performance was finally over. I didn't have to pretend anymore. As we stood to leave, he walked over to me. His lawyers were already packing their briefcases. He leaned in close, his voice low and smooth. "Good luck, Sarah," he said. And then he smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're going to need it." It wasn't a wish. It was a final, perfectly placed stone on the mountain of my ruin. He turned and walked out of that conference room, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, leaving me at ground zero of my own life, with nothing but a pen mark on a piece of paper and his curse hanging in the air. Ground zero is a quiet place. After the explosion, after the collapse, there's a moment of profound, ringing silence. That conference room, with his final curse hanging in the air, was the blast. My tiny, empty apartment was the silence that followed. For the first few months, I did little more than breathe, in and out. It felt like a monumental effort. The loneliness was a living entity in that apartment. It sat with me at my rickety card table. It lay beside me on the mattress on the floor, its cold weight more real than the man who used to be there. Some days the grief was an ocean, and I would just let it pull me under. I'd stay in bed, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, letting the waves of what I'd lost wash over me until I was too exhausted to feel anything at all. I was mourning a death, not his, but the death of the woman I was, the one who believed in the blueprint, the one who carried that napkin in her wallet for 15 years. I had to let her go. I had to say goodbye. But then, there were other moments, glimmers. I remember one morning, standing in the kitchen making coffee. The sun was streaming through the window, hitting that absurdly yellow wall I had painted. And I realized, I didn't have to ask anyone if they wanted coffee. I could make it exactly how I liked it. Weak, with too much cream. A tiny thing, a ridiculous thing. But the freedom of it was staggering. I could play whatever music I wanted, as loud as I wanted. I could leave my painting supplies all over the living room floor, and no one would call it a mess. These were not consolations, they were revelations. In the vast, terrifying emptiness of my new life, I was finding small pockets of liberation. The silence was no longer just an absence of him, it was becoming the presence of me. The healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, spiraling, beautiful chaos. I started with the yellow wall, and I kept going. I found a therapist, a kind woman with wise eyes who didn't let me get away with anything. In her office, I unpacked the 15 years I had stored in my one suitcase. I took out every memory, every lie, every moment of self-doubt, and I looked at it in the light. She taught me to see that his gaslighting wasn't a reflection of my weakness, but of his own profound insecurity. She gave me the language for my pain, and in naming it, I began to take its power away. I called the friends I had let drift away, the ones who knew me before I was a we. I was so afraid they would judge me, see me as a failure. Instead, they wrapped their arms around me and welcomed me home. They reminded me of the Sarah who loved to argue about politics, who could spend an entire afternoon in a museum, who told terrible jokes. They saw me, the real me, and their reflection helped me find my own. And I started to paint again, not charming little watercolors. I bought huge canvases, big, messy buckets of acrylics. I painted, with my hands, with palette knives, with anything I could find. I threw anger and grief and confusion onto those canvases. The colors were loud, chaotic, and sometimes ugly. But they were honest. And slowly, something began to happen. My art started to sell, first at a local art fair, then a small gallery asked to represent me. The thing he had dismissed as a hobby was becoming my livelihood. I was building a career, not as a support system for someone else's dream, but from the very center of my own soul. My life today looks nothing like the one I lost, and I am grateful for that every single day. I live in a small loft apartment downtown, in an old converted warehouse with high ceilings and huge windows that let in all the morning light. It's messy, and it's mine. Canvases lean against every wall, books are stacked on the floor, and there's a half-finished mug of tea on almost every surface. That defiant yellow from my first apartment is still here, on the front door. It's a daily reminder of where I started. My routine is my own. I wake with the sun, not an alarm clock. Some mornings I go for a long hike in the hills outside the city, a passion I'd forgotten I had. Other mornings I just sit with my coffee and write in a journal, untangling my thoughts before the day begins. My work is my art. I spend my days covered in paint, creating worlds on canvas. It's hard work, it's uncertain, but it's real, it's mine. The woman who lives here is not the woman who danced in that empty living room. That woman was trusting and soft. This woman is resilient. She's learned that her own validation is the only one that matters. She's learned that love should be a collaboration, not a demolition. It should make your world bigger, not smaller. She's learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. I enjoy my own company now. I am a good friend to myself. Have I forgiven him? That's a question people ask a lot. And the answer is no. I don't carry hate for him. That would be like drinking poison and waiting for him to die. But forgiveness, in the way people mean it, feels like saying what he did was okay. And it wasn't. What I have done is far more important. I have accepted it. I have accepted that the story I was living was a fiction. I accept that he was who he was. And I have forgiven myself. I've forgiven myself for not seeing the cracks, for believing in the blueprint of a man who was incapable of building an honest life. I've forgiven myself for losing my own voice in the chorus of we. That was the hardest work, and the most freeing. I don't know what the future holds. For the first time in my life, there is no 5-year plan, no blueprint. And that used to terrify me. Now it excites me. The future is a blank canvas. Am I open to love again? Yes. But I'm not looking for an architect. I don't need anyone to build my life for me. If I meet someone, they will be a partner. A fellow traveler who walks beside me, not a king in a castle I'm expected to maintain. My fortress is already built. And its walls aren't meant to keep people out. They're meant to protect the woman who lives inside. His final words to me were a curse. Good luck, Sarah, you're gonna need it. He was right. I did need it. But I also needed grit. I needed courage. I needed to learn how to hear my own voice in a silent room. He thought he was leaving me with nothing, but what he really did was clear the land. He took the house of cards, the faulty blueprints, the life that was built on a lie, and on that cleared empty ground, I found the one thing that was truly mine. Myself. He left the architect all right. He just didn't realize who she was. If I could reach back through time, back to the woman in the bookstore, the one with all the questions who thought she'd just found the answer, what would I say to her? It's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times. My first instinct is to warn her, to scream, "Run! He is not who you think he is. That blueprint is a lie." But I wouldn't. I wouldn't take a single step of this journey away from her, because the woman I am today was not born in that bookstore. She was forged in the fire that came after. So instead I would go to her, that trusting girl with the hopeful eyes, and I would gently take her hands. I wouldn't tell her about the heartache. I wouldn't tell her about the lies or the cold conference room. I would tell her about sheer her. I would tell her, your heart, the one you are about to give away so completely, is not fragile. It is the strongest thing about you. Your capacity to love so deeply, to build a world for someone else with such devotion, is not a weakness. It is a superpower. And one day you will learn to turn that incredible power inward. I would tell her that the pieces of herself she is about to lose are not gone forever. They are just waiting for her to come back and claim them. And I would whisper in her ear, the person who will try to bury you does not know that you are a seed. And you are going to grow into something more magnificent than you can possibly imagine. I would tell her she is the architect. She just doesn't know it yet. And if you are listening to this right now, if you are sitting on your own cold hardwood floor, surrounded by the ruins of a life you thought would last forever, I see you. I know the silence that is screaming in your ears. I know the weight of the ghost in the empty space beside you. I know you feel like you have been erased. Listen to me. You are not at an end. You are at the most powerful beginning you will ever be given. Ground Zero is not a graveyard. It is a launching pad. The demolition was not your destruction. It was the clearing of the land. Because the life that was built there was on a faulty foundation. It was too small for the woman you are about to become. Your journey back will not be easy. There will be days when getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain. But you will do it. Start small. Find your yellow wall. It might be a new lipstick. It might be signing up for a class you've always dreamed of. It might just be making a cup of coffee, exactly the way you like it. Find one small thing that is yours, and yours alone, and hold on to it. That is your first brick. Lay it. Then lay another. You will have to learn a new language. The language of I. It will feel selfish at first. It will feel foreign. Say it anyway. I want, I need, I will, I am. Speak it until it becomes your native tongue again. You are not a supporting character in someone else's story. You are the lead in your own. And please, hear this. Forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for not knowing what you couldn't have known. Forgive yourself for loving with an open heart. That is a gift, not a flaw. The work is not to become cynical and guarded. The work is to learn that your own love, your own approval, is the only one you ever truly needed. The person you were is not gone. She is the foundation of the person you are becoming. And the person you are becoming is a fortress, not a fortress of stone built to keep the world out, but a fortress of self-knowledge, of resilience, of a quiet, unshakable confidence that says, I have been to the bottom, and I know the way back up. Your future is not a blueprint drawn by someone else. It is a blank canvas. And you hold the brush, you get to choose the colors. Make them bright, make them bold, make them gloriously, unapologetically yours. He took the house, the car, the furniture. He took the past, but he could not take your future. By leaving you with nothing, he unknowingly gave you everything. He gave you back to yourself. And that is the one thing no one can ever take from you again. Now go build.